They say an omega's worth is measured by her strength. I learned too late that some truths are designed to break you before you ever have a chance to prove them wrong. Alara had always known she was different, but knowing and accepting are two very different things. In the Silverpine Pack, strength was everything. Alphas led with iron fists and commanding presence. Betas formed the backbone of pack society. Loyal, capable, essential. Even other Omegas had their place, bearing strong pups and maintaining the delicate social bonds that held the pack together. But Alara? She was what the pack elders whispered about in disapproving tones. Weak, frail. A wolf so small that even in her shifted form, she barely reached the shoulder height of a normal Omega. Her wolf was pale silver, almost white, beautiful, some said, but beauty meant nothing when you couldn't defend yourself or contribute to pack hunts. The healers had diagnosed her condition when she was 12. A deficiency in her wolf essence, they'd called it. Something about her connection to her inner wolf being stunted, incomplete. She would never be strong, never be fast, never be enough. "It's not your fault," her mother had said, holding her as she sobbed. But Alara had seen the disappointment in her father's eyes, heard the way conversation stopped when she entered a room. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed. Kale Thorn had chosen her as his mate. Kale, the pack's strongest warrior, third in command, with a wolf as black as midnight, and a reputation for ferocity in battle, power. When he'd approached her during the harvest moon gathering, she'd thought it was a cruel joke. Warriors like Kale didn't choose Omegas like her. "You're different," he'd said, his amber eyes intense. "I don't want some mindless broodmare. I want someone with intelligence, someone I can actually talk to." She'd been so desperate to believe him, so pathetically grateful that someone saw past her weakness to the person beneath. For 2 years, she'd tried. Gods, how she'd tried. Every month that passed without conception felt like another nail in the coffin of their bond. Kale grew distant, his initial kindness curdling into resentment. The pack whispered louder. Even the healer began to avoid her eyes during examinations. "Perhaps if you were stronger," the healer had suggested delicately. "Sometimes a weak wolf cannot sustain new life." Alara had doubled her efforts, forcing herself through painful training sessions, choking down herbal concoctions that tasted like dirt and desperation. Nothing worked. Then, 6 months ago, Kale stopped coming to their bed entirely. She'd pretended not to notice, pretended not to smell other Omegas' scents clinging to his clothes, pretended her heart wasn't breaking with each passing day. The rejection came on a cold autumn morning. "I'm done, Alara." Kale's voice had been flat, emotionless. "I've wasted 3 years on you. The pack needs strong pups, and you clearly can't provide them." "Please," she'd whispered, hating herself for begging. "Just give me more time. I can—" "You can't do anything." His lip had curled with disgust. "You're defective, broken. I should have listened to everyone who warned me not to waste my prime years on damaged goods." The formal rejection ceremony was swift and humiliating. Standing before the entire pack while Kale severed their mate bond felt like having her soul torn in half. She'd collapsed, the pain so intense she'd blacked out. When she'd woken, her mother was crying beside her bed. "I'm so sorry, sweetling," she'd whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her father hadn't even come to see her. That had been 4 months ago. Since then, Alara had existed in a strange limbo, technically still pack, but treated like a ghost. No one met her eyes. No one spoke to her unless absolutely necessary. She'd become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when weak wolves forgot their place. Now, As she knelt in her family's small cottage, packing her meager belongings into a worn canvas bag, Alara felt nothing but hollow resignation. The pack alpha had made his decision. She was to be sent away. Cast out, essentially, though they were framing it more diplomatically. Reassignment to serve the royal household, the decree had read. A polite fiction to mask the truth. The Silverpine Pack had no use for a broken Omega who couldn't even fulfill the one purpose her designation demanded. Tomorrow? She would leave the only home she'd ever known, sent to the Crystal Court to serve as… what? A maid? A servant? The decree hadn't specified, and Alara hadn't asked. What did it matter? She folded her last clean dress, simple gray wool, worn at the elbows, and placed it carefully in the bag. Her hands shook slightly. Whether from weakness or emotion, she couldn't tell anymore. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. The pack song, celebrating the new litter of pups born to Kale and his new mate. Alara closed her eyes and tried not to think about the secret she carried. The one truth that made everything infinitely more complicated and terrifying. She wasn't barren after all. The royal summons arrived at dawn, carried by a courier whose wolf was 3 times Alara's size. She'd been awake already, watching the sun rise over the pine forest one last time, when the knock came. Her mother answered, and Alara heard the sharp intake of breath that meant something had changed. "Alara," her mother called, voice tight with anxiety. "You need to see this." The courier stood in their doorway, his expression carefully neutral as he held out a sealed envelope. Not the ordinary parchment she'd expected, but heavy vellum stamped with the royal crest, a wolf's head crowned with stars. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. By order of His Majesty, Alpha King Davrian Ashford, the Omega known as Alara of Silverpine Pack is hereby summoned to the Crystal Court. She is to present herself within 3 days' time for a matter of urgent pack business. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges of defiance against the crown. Alara read it twice, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What does it mean?" her mother whispered. "What have you done?" "Nothing," Alara said, but her voice cracked. I don't understand." The courier cleared his throat. "I'm not privy to His Majesty's reasons, miss, but I'm to escort you personally. We leave within the hour." "An hour?" Her mother's face went pale. "But she needs time to prepare to—" "Those are my orders, ma'am." The courier's tone softened slightly. "Pack light. You'll be provided for at the palace." After he left to water his horse, Alara's mother grabbed her shoulders. "Tell me the truth. What happened at the lunar summit?" Alara's stomach dropped. The summit. 3 months ago, when the pack had sent representatives to the Crystal Court for the annual gathering of all regional packs. Alara had gone as part of the servant contingent, invisible and beneath notice, or so she'd thought. "Nothing happened," Alara said, but the lie tasted bitter. Everything had happened. Everything had changed. She'd been carrying linens through the palace's east wing when she'd gotten lost. The corridors all looked the same. White marble and crystal chandeliers, and paintings of stern-faced alphas, watching her with judgmental eyes. She'd turned a corner and found herself in a library. And for a moment, she'd forgotten her terror at being somewhere she shouldn't be. Books. Thousands of them, floor to ceiling, more than she'd ever seen in her life. "You look like you've found paradise." Alara had spun around, dropping the linens. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes like molten silver. The power radiating from him had made her wolf whimper and press low in submission. Alpha. Not just any alpha. The scent alone told her this was someone important, someone dangerous. "I'm sorry," she'd stammered, dropping her gaze. "I got lost. I'll leave immediately. Do you read? He'd asked instead, moving into the room with a predator's grace. Yes, sir, I mean when I can. My pack doesn't. She'd stopped herself. Don't bore important people with your problems. I'm sorry for the intrusion. Stop apologizing. His voice had been rough, but not unkind. What's your name? Alara, sir, of Silverpine Pack. He'd studied her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his face. Alara? He'd repeated, as if testing how her name felt. You're small for an Omega. Shame had burned through her. Yes, sir. I have a deficiency, I didn't say it was a bad thing. He'd moved to one of the shelves, pulling down a volume bound in blue leather. Here, take this. She'd stared at the book he held out poetry. The spine read, in gold lettering. I can't, sir. That's too valuable for someone like what? His eyes had narrowed. Someone who appreciates books? Someone who looks at a library like other wolves look at fresh meat? Despite her fear, she'd almost smiled. You notice that? I notice everything. He'd pressed the book into her hands. Consider it a loan. Return it when you finish. That should have been the end of it. A strange, kind interaction with a powerful alpha who'd shown her unexpected mercy. But it hadn't ended there. She'd seen him again the next night, in the palace gardens, where she'd gone to escape the suffocating attention of her pack members. He'd been there too, standing alone under the stars, and when he'd seen her, he'd smiled. They'd talked, just talked, about books and philosophy and what it meant to be different in a world that demanded conformity. He'd never asked her designation, never pushed for information about her pack. For those few stolen hours, she'd felt like a person instead of a defect. On the third night, he'd kissed her. On the fourth night, she'd gone to his chambers. She'd known it was reckless, possibly suicidal. If anyone found out an Omega from a minor pack had bedded an alpha of his obvious status, she'd be severely punished. But Kale had rejected her. Her pack had abandoned her, and for one night she'd wanted to feel desired instead of discarded. He'd been gentle, reverent, even. He'd traced the lines of her body like she was something precious, and when he'd finally claimed her, she'd felt complete in a way she'd never experienced with Kale. Afterward, lying in his arms, she'd made the mistake of asking his name. Does it matter? He'd murmured against her hair. I'd like to know who I'll remember, she'd whispered. He'd tensed slightly, then relaxed. Davrian, just Davrian. No pack name, no title. She'd fallen asleep feeling safe. When she'd woken at dawn, he was gone. No note, no goodbye, just rumpled sheets and the lingering scent of cedar and night-blooming jasmine. She'd returned to Silverpine the next day, trying to convince herself it had been a beautiful dream, nothing more. Then, 3 weeks later, she'd realized her heat cycle hadn't come. Now, standing in her mother's cottage with a royal summons in her hands, Alara felt the walls closing in. He knew. Somehow, Davrian, whoever he really was, had found out she was pregnant, and he was bringing her to the Crystal Court. The question was, to claim her or to eliminate the evidence, plied. Alara? Her mother's voice pulled her back. Whatever you've done, you need to tell me now. Alara looked at her mother's worried face and made a decision. I can't, she said quietly. But I promise, I'll handle it. Even as she said it, she wasn't sure if she was lying. The Crystal Court rose from the mountainside like something from a dream, all white stone and soaring towers, with windows that caught the sunlight and threw rainbows across the snow. Alara had seen it from a distance during the summit, but approaching on foot, with the courier leading her through the massive gates, she felt like she was being swallowed by something magnificent and terrifying. Guards lined the entrance, each one radiating alpha dominance. She kept her eyes down, her wolf pressed so flat in submission it was almost painful. Everything about this place screamed power, and she was acutely aware of how small and insignificant she was in comparison. Purses. This way, the courier said, leading her not through the grand entrance she remembered from the summit, but around to a side door. Servant's entrance, she realized. Of course. Inside, the corridors were narrower, less ornate. She was led down a flight of stairs into what appeared to be the palace's lower levels, still clean and well-maintained, but clearly not meant for noble eyes. A severe-looking woman in a housekeeper's uniform waited at the bottom of the stairs. Her wolf scent marked her as a strong beta, and her expression suggested she suffered fools poorly. "This is the one?" the woman asked, looking Alara up and down with obvious disappointment. "Yes, ma'am. Direct from Silverpine Pack," the housekeeper sniffed. "Well, she's certainly small enough. Come with me, girl. We have procedures." Alara followed, her bag clutched to her chest like a shield. They moved through a maze of corridors until they reached a washing room where 3 other Omegas were already working, scrubbing palace linens in large tubs. "Strip," the housekeeper commanded. Alara's hands froze on her bag. "I'm sorry? I'm sorry." "Your clothes. Off. We can't have you bringing village filth into His Majesty's palace." The woman's nose wrinkled. "You'll be properly washed and given appropriate attire." Shame burned through Alara, but she complied. The other Omegas watched with a mixture of pity and disdain as she removed her worn traveling clothes. The water was ice cold. They scrubbed her skin raw, washed her hair with soap that smelled like lye, and examined her for any signs of disease or parasites. Through it all, Alara kept her arms wrapped around her stomach, terrified they would notice the slight swell that was just beginning to show. "She's malnourished," one of the washing attendants commented. "Look at her ribs." "Silverpine is a poor pack," the housekeeper said dismissively. "We'll put some meat on her bones. The king requires his servants to be healthy, even if they're—" She paused, looking at Alara's small frame. "Limited." They dressed her in a simple gray uniform, the same style the other servant Omegas wore, and braided her damp hair into a severe plait. When they finally led her to a mirror, Alara barely recognized herself. She looked even smaller, more fragile than usual. Pershaw. "You'll be housed in the Omega quarters," the housekeeper explained as they walked. "3rd floor, east wing. You'll share a room with 3 others. Meals are provided in the servants' hall. You're expected to be awake before dawn and in bed after the evening bells. Any violation of curfew will result in punishment." "What will my duties be?" Alara asked quietly. The housekeeper's expression turned strange. "That hasn't been determined yet. His Majesty has specific plans for you." "His Majesty?" "King Davrian himself requested your presence." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Whatever you did to catch his attention, I suggest you pray it was favorable. Our king is not known for his mercy." King Davrian. The world tilted. The man she'd spent those 4 nights with, the one who'd made her feel seen and desired, wasn't just some high-ranking alpha. He was the Alpha King. "I think I'm going to be sick," Alara whispered. "Not on my clean floors, you're not." The housekeeper grabbed her arm. "Breathe, girl. Whatever happens, remember your place. You're an Omega from a minor pack. Your life depends on not forgetting that." They reached the Omega quarters, a long room lined with narrow beds. 3 young women looked up as Alara entered, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. "This is your new roommate," the housekeeper announced. "Alara of Silverpine. Make her feel welcome." The tone suggested this was not actually a priority. After the housekeeper left, The three Omegas returned to their tasks. Finally, one of them, a pretty girl with auburn hair, spoke. "So what did you do?" "I'm sorry?" "To get summoned personally by the king." The girl's eyes were sharp. "We've all been here for months, some of us years. None of us have ever been specifically requested. So what makes you special?" "Nothing," Alara said quickly. "I'm not special at all." "I'm not special at all." "Then why are you here?" asked another girl, this one with a suspicious glare. Alara sank onto the empty bed, exhaustion overwhelming her. "I truly don't know." But she did know. And tonight, when the moon rose, she would find out whether the Alpha King remembered the small Omega he'd bedded during the summit, or if she'd been just another forgettable conquest. And then she'd discover whether carrying his heir would save her life or end it. They came for her at sunset. Alara had been trying to rest, curled on her narrow bed, while her roommates whispered about her in voices they didn't bother to lower. The sharp knock on the door made everyone jump. A palace guard stood in the hallway, his face impassive. "Alara of Silverpine, you're to come with me." The room went silent. The auburn-haired Omega mouthed "good luck" with an expression that suggested Alara would need it. The guard led her up, not down. They climbed staircase after staircase, moving from the servants' levels to the palace proper. Here, the walls were covered in tapestries depicting legendary wolf battles. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Every corner radiated wealth and power. They stopped before an ornate door carved with wolves and stars. The guard knocked once, then pushed it open. "Your Majesty, the Omega you requested, pies." "Leave us," came a voice from within. That voice, deep and commanding, but with the same rough edge she remembered from whispered conversations in the dark. The guard bowed and retreated, closing the door behind him. Alara stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The room was a study walls lined with books, a massive desk covered in maps and correspondence, and by the window, silhouetted against the dying light, King Davrian. Ashford turned to face her. He looked different in the formal attire of his position, a deep blue jacket with silver embroidery, his dark hair swept back, the crown of twisted silver resting on his brow. But his eyes were the same. Those molten silver eyes that had watched her with such intensity in the library, in the gardens, in his bed. "Hello, Alara," he said quietly. She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely. He moved closer, and she fought the instinct to back away. "You may look at me. In private, you don't need to submit." Slowly, she raised her eyes to his face. "Your Majesty." Something flickered in his expression. 3 months ago, you called me by my name. 3 months ago, I didn't know you were the king." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "You didn't tell me. Would you have come to my chambers if I had?" "No." The admission was immediate, honest. "That's why I didn't tell you." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his scent, cedar and jasmine, achingly familiar. "I wanted one night where someone saw me as just a man, not a king, not a political piece, not a living symbol of pack unity, just Davrian." Alara's hands clenched at her sides. "And now we have a complication." His gaze dropped to her stomach. "Don't we?" She wrapped her arms around herself protectively. "How did you know?" "I have healers who monitor anyone who enters the palace during the summit. Standard security protocol." His jaw tightened. "When your name appeared on the list of potential pregnancies, I had it investigated." Imagine my surprise when I discovered the Omega I'd spent 4 nights with was not only pregnant, but had returned to a pack that had already rejected her. Thus, you investigated me. Anger cut through her fear. You spied on me. I protected what's mine, he countered, his voice dropping to a growl that made her wolf whimper. That child you're carrying is the heir to the Crystal Court. Did you really think I would leave you unguarded in a pack that treats you like garbage? I can take care of myself. Can you? He moved closer, and she stumbled back until her shoulders hit the door. Ominous. He stopped, giving her space, but his eyes burned with intensity. Tell me, Alara, when your pack discovered you were pregnant, what exactly was their plan for you? She said nothing, because they both knew the answer. Omegas who bore children out of pair bonds were shamed, often cast out completely. A weak Omega who'd somehow conceived when her own mate couldn't get her pregnant. They would have assumed she'd betrayed Kale, been unfaithful. The punishment would have been severe. That's what I thought, Davrian said softly. So I brought you here, where you're safe. Safe? Alara's laugh was bitter. I'm a servant in a palace where everyone sees me as worthless. I'm carrying a child that's going to mark me as someone who seduced the king. How exactly is that safe? Because I'm claiming you, he said simply. And the child. The words hung in the air between them. What? She whispered. You'll stay here, in the palace. I'll provide for everything you need. When the child is born, they'll be recognized as my legitimate heir. He paused. And you'll be my mate. Ilara stared at him. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I'm from a minor pack. I'm defective. I can't even shift properly. Her voice rose with each point. Your council would never accept. I am the Alpha King, Davrian interrupted, his voice hardening. I don't require my council's permission to choose my mate. But why? The question burst out of her. You could have anyone. A powerful alpha female, a strong omega from a major pack. Why would you saddle yourself with someone like me? His expression softened slightly. Because in 4 nights, you made me feel more seen than I've felt in my entire life. Because when you looked at me, you didn't see a king or a conquest or a political advantage. You saw someone worth talking to about poetry and philosophy at 3 in the morning. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. Because you're brave and intelligent and kind, and those are the qualities I want in a mate and a mother to my children. Alara's eyes burned with unshed tears. This is insane. Perhaps. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But it's happening. So the question is, will you agree willingly, or do I need to command you? She searched his face, looking for deception, for hidden cruelty. But all she saw was the same man who'd given her a book of poetry, who'd held her like she was precious, who'd made her feel whole for the first time in her life. If I agree, she said slowly, I want something in return. His eyebrows rose. You're negotiating with me? You said the child needs a strong mother. Negotiation is a strength. She lifted her chin. I want time. Time before we make this public. Time to prepare. Time to figure out if this is real or just obligation. How much time? Until the child is born, Davrian studied her for a long moment. That's 6 months away. Yes. And during those 6 months, I stay here. I'll spend time with you, get to know you beyond 4 stolen nights. Perfend. But I won't be paraded around as your mate until I'm certain this is what we both truly want. And if, at the end of 6 months, you decide you don't want this? Alara met his eyes steadily. Then you let me go. You provide for the child, but you don't force me to stay. The silence stretched between them. Then, Slowly, Davrian smiled. You're much braver than you think you are. Is that a yes? On one condition. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Every evening you come to my chambers. We talk, we eat together, we learn each other. No servants, no guards, just us. Her heart raced. Just talk? Unless you want more, he murmured. But that will be entirely your choice. Alara swallowed hard. And during the day? You'll continue as a servant. It will help hide your condition until we're ready to announce it. His hand moved to rest gently over her stomach. But you'll have the best healers, the best food, everything you need for our child's health. Our child. The words sent a shiver through her. 6 months, she repeated. And you'll let me choose at the end. 6 months, he agreed. Though I intend to make that choice very easy for you. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the sheer insanity of the situation, Alara found herself almost smiling. You're that confident. I convinced you to spend 4 nights with me when you thought I was just some random alpha, he said with a hint of his old charm. Imagine what I can do with 6 months. This time, she did smile. I suppose we'll find out. He held out his hand. So, we have a bargain? Alara looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. The Alpha King who'd chosen her, who'd protected her, who was offering her something she'd never expected, a chance. She placed her hand in his. Porate. We have a bargain. The first week was awkward. Every evening, just after sunset, the same guard would appear at the servants' quarters and escort Alara to the king's private chambers. Her roommates had stopped asking questions after the second night, but their jealous whispers followed her down the corridor. She must be warming his bed, the auburn-haired Omega whose name was Senna had muttered. Why else would he want her every night? If only they knew the truth was somehow both simpler and more complicated. Davrian kept his word. When she arrived each evening, he would dismiss the guard and they would sit together in his study, not his bedroom, and simply talk. Sometimes over dinner, sometimes over tea, often surrounded by the books that had first brought them together. Tell me about Silverpine, he'd said on the third night. What was it like growing up there? Alara had hesitated, picking at her food. The meals he provided were simple but delicious, far better than the servants' hall fare. Small, everyone knew everyone, which meant everyone knew your business. And your business was that I was defective. She'd said it matter-of-factly, trying to keep the old pain from her voice. The Omega, who couldn't shift properly, couldn't hunt, couldn't do anything useful. Davrian's fork had paused midway to his mouth. Did they hurt you? Not physically, but words can be their own kind of wound. She'd met his eyes. You must have grown up very differently. I grew up in a cage made of expectations and protocol, he'd replied. Every action scrutinized, every friendship calculated for political advantage. At least you knew who your real enemies were. Did you have any real friends? He'd thought about it for a long moment. I had allies, I had counselors, I had court functionaries who laughed at my jokes because I was the prince. He'd set down his fork. But friends? People who saw me, not my crown? No. Daughter. That had been the moment something shifted between them, when they'd stopped being king and servant, or even Alpha and Omega, and became simply two lonely people trying to understand each other. By the second week, their conversations grew longer, deeper. Davrian told her about the weight of leadership, the impossible decisions, the way every choice he made affected thousands of lives. She told him about her attempts to find worth beyond childbearing, her love of stories and learning, the small rebellions that had kept her spirit alive. I used to sneak into the pack library after hours, she'd admitted one night. The books were supposed to be just for betas and alphas, but the librarian, a kind old beta named Torin, he'd leave the window unlocked for me. A rebel, Davrian had said with a smile that made her stomach flutter. Hardly. I just wanted to read. She'd paused. Though I suppose wanting something you're not supposed to have is its own kind of rebellion. Then we're both rebels, he'd murmured, his eyes intense on hers. Because I wanted you from the moment I saw you in that library, and I definitely wasn't supposed to have you. Alara's breath had caught. Why not? Because kings don't fall for lost omegas carrying linens. He'd reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. They make strategic alliances with powerful families. They choose mates who strengthen political bonds, not ones who make their hearts race by simply existing. And yet here we are, she'd whispered. Here we are, he'd agreed. The third week brought physical changes Alara could no longer hide. Her uniform grew tight across her stomach, and the palace healers who examined her weekly remarked on the child's unusual strength. The pup is developing faster than normal, the head healer, a stern woman named Thessa, had told them during one of Alara's evening visits to Davrian's chambers. Given your majesty's bloodline, this isn't entirely unexpected, but we'll need to monitor closely. After Thessa left, Alara had stood by the window, one hand pressed to her swelling belly. What if something goes wrong? What if my body can't handle? Stop. Davrian had come up behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You're stronger than you think. Everyone keeps saying that, but I'm not. I'm weak. I've always been weak, and now I'm carrying a child who's apparently developing at supernatural speed. What if, Alara, he turned her to face him. Do you know what I see when I look at you? She'd shaken her head, not trusting her voice. I see someone who survived years of emotional abuse and still maintained her kindness. Someone who was rejected by her mate and pack but didn't let it destroy her spirit. Someone who's brave enough to negotiate with a king and smart enough to protect herself even when she's terrified. His hands had framed her face. You are not weak, you're a survivor, and our child is lucky to have you as their mother. Tears had spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. You don't know me well enough to say that. Then let me learn. His thumb had brushed away her tears. That's what these 6 months are for, remember? To learn each other, to build something real. By the 4th week, Alara found herself looking forward to their evenings together, with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified her. She caught herself thinking about things she wanted to tell him throughout the day, questions she wanted to ask, observations she wanted to share. You're falling for him, Senna had said one night, watching Alara prepare for her evening visit with unusual care. The king? Don't be ridiculous, Alara had replied, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed her. Everyone falls for him eventually. He's the Alpha King. Senna's voice had softened slightly. Just be careful. Men like that, they can't belong to just one person. Even if he wanted to, the crown won't allow it. The warning had echoed in Alara's mind as she'd walked to Davrian's chambers that night. When she'd entered, she'd found him at his desk, surrounded by documents, his expression weary. Bad day? She'd asked. The Eastern Pacts are threatening rebellion if I don't increase their territorial holdings. The Southern Pacts want expanded hunting rights. Pacts. The Western Pacts are demanding I intervene in a succession dispute. He'd rubbed his temples. And through it all, I have to pretend I'm not terrified that my mate is going to decide at the end of 6 months that she'd rather be anywhere but at my side. The admission had stolen her breath. You're worried about that? Every day. He looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes had made her chest ache. You're the only good thing in my life, Alara. the only person who doesn't want something from me beyond my company, if you leave. He'd stopped himself. I promised you a choice. I'll honor that. But yes, I'm terrified. Alara had moved around the desk, acting on instinct. She'd taken his hand, pulling him to his feet, and wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, he'd frozen, as if no one had simply hugged him in years. Then his arms had come around her, holding her close. I'm scared too, she'd whispered against his chest. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of disappointing you. Scared that this is all too good to be true and it will fall apart. Then we'll be scared together, he'd murmured into her hair. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll find out we didn't need to be scared at all. That night, they'd fallen asleep on the couch in his study, wrapped in each other's arms, both finding a peace they hadn't known they'd been missing. And for the first time since she'd been cast aside by her pack, Alara allowed herself to hope. The 5th week brought the first snow of winter, and with it, a shift in the palace's atmosphere. Preparations for the Winter Solstice Festival began a massive celebration that would bring representatives from every pack in the kingdom to the Crystal Court. You'll need to stay hidden during the festival, Davrian had told her one evening, his expression troubled. Too many eyes, too many questions. Alara had nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She'd heard the other servants talking excitedly about the festival, the music, the dancing, the once-a-year chance to glimpse the inner workings of pack politics. But of course, she would need to remain invisible. I'm sorry, he'd added, seeing through her mask. I know it's not fair to hide you away like some guilty secret. I understand the political necessity, she'd replied. But her voice had been flat. Davrian had crossed to where she sat, kneeling in front of her so they were eye level. After the festival, we'll be past the halfway point of our 6 months. If you still want us, I'll start laying the groundwork to announce you as my mate. No more hiding. And if I don't, pain had flickered across his face, quickly masked. Then I keep my promise. You're free to go. That night, lying alone in her narrow servant's bed while her roommates snored around her, Alara had pressed her hands to her swelling stomach and tried to imagine leaving. Walking away from Davrian, from the palace, from the only place where she'd felt truly valued. She couldn't do it. Somewhere in the past month and a half, her heart had made a decision her mind was still catching up to. She was in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like finally exhaling after holding her breath for years. The festival arrived with fanfare and chaos. The palace filled with visiting alphas and their entourages, each pack trying to outdo the others in displays of wealth and power. Alara kept to the servants' corridors, avoiding the grand halls where she might be seen. But on the 3rd night of the festival, one of the visiting alphas caught her scent in a hallway. Well, the alpha, a massive man with scars across his face, had blocked her path. What's a pretty little Omega doing wandering alone? I'm on palace business, sir, Alara had said, keeping her eyes down. Please excuse me. I don't think so. He'd moved closer, and the predatory intent in his movements had made her wolf howl in fear. You smell different. Fertile. When was your last heat? Alara's hand had instinctively gone to her stomach. Too late, she'd realized the mistake. The alpha's eyes had widened. You're pregnant. His nostrils had flared as he'd scented her more deeply, and his expression had turned calculating. But not pair-bonded. Interesting. Let me pass, she'd said, trying to keep her voice steady. Not until you tell me whose bastard you're carrying. Maybe I'll buy you from the palace. I could use a fertile Omega, even a small one. She's not for sale. The voice had come from behind the alpha, cold and deadly. Davrian had appeared seemingly from nowhere, still in his formal festival attire, but his eyes had burned with barely controlled rage. The visiting alpha had spun around, and the color had drained from his face when he'd recognized who he was facing. "Your Majesty!" "I didn't realize." "You didn't realize that threatening my servants in my own palace was unacceptable?" Davrian's voice had been silk over steel. "Or you didn't realize that the Omega you were attempting to purchase is under my personal protection?" "I meant no offense, Your Majesty." The Alpha had bowed deeply. "I was simply admiring." "Get out of my sight," Davrian had commanded, "and consider your invitation to future festivals revoked." After the Alpha had fled, Davrian had turned to Alara. "Are you hurt?" She'd shaken her head, still trembling with adrenaline. "Come with me. Now." He'd taken her hand and led her not to his study, but to a smaller, more private chamber she'd never seen before. A bedroom, she'd realized. His actual bedroom, not the public one used for formal occasions. "I can't keep doing this," he'd said once the door was closed. "Watching you be treated like property. Knowing that every alpha in this palace sees you as available because you're not publicly claimed." He'd paced the room like a caged wolf. "It's driving me insane." Percent. We agreed to wait. Alara had reminded him gently, "To hell with what we agreed." He'd spun to face her. "Power. Do you have any idea what it's like? Watching other alphas look at you and knowing I can't protect you the way I want to? Knowing that at any moment, someone could hurt you, take you, and I'd be too late to stop it?" "Davrian, I'm in love with you," he'd said, the words exploding out of him. "I've been in love with you since you looked at my library like it was treasure and talked to me about poetry until 3 in the morning. I'm in love with you, and I'm terrified every single day that something will happen to you or our child and I won't be there to prevent it." Alara had stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. "I know I said 6 months," he'd continued, his voice rough. "I know I promised you time and choice and freedom. And I'll keep that promise, even if it kills me. But I need you to know, you need to understand that this isn't political strategy for me. This isn't about securing an heir or fulfilling some obligation. This is about the fact that you're the first person who ever made me feel like I was enough, just as I am, crown and all." "Stop," she'd whispered. He'd fallen silent, his chest heaving. Alara had crossed the room slowly, her hands shaking as she'd reached up to cup his face. "You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" That I'm in love with you too." The admission had felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I tried not to be. I told myself it was gratitude, or pregnancy hormones, or just being overwhelmed by kindness after years of cruelty. But the truth is, I fell for you the first night, when you gave me that book of poetry and looked at me like I mattered." His hands had come up to cover hers. "Ilara, I'm still scared," she'd continued. "Scared of being hurt, scared of not being enough for you, scared that one day you'll regret choosing someone so completely wrong for you. But I'm more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." "You're not wrong for me," he'd said fiercely. "You're everything I never knew I needed." "Then prove it," she'd whispered. "No more hiding, no more waiting. If you love me, if you truly want this, then claim me, publicly. Tomorrow. The council will fight it. The other packs will challenge it. Let them." She'd smiled, feeling brave and reckless and more alive than she'd ever felt. "You're the Alpha King. And I'm the Omega who's carrying your heir. If they don't like it, they can learn to deal with it." For a moment, he'd simply stared at her. Then he'd laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his entire face. "You're absolutely right. Let them try to challenge us. He'd kissed her then, and it had felt nothing like their first kiss during the summit. That had been exploratory, tentative. This was a claiming, a promise, a declaration of war against anyone who would try to separate them. When they'd finally broken apart, both breathing hard, Davrian had pressed his forehead to hers. "Tomorrow," he'd promised. "I'll announce it tomorrow, at the final feast, in front of every major pack in the kingdom. Down in Esther, in front of every major pack in the kingdom. Down in Esther tomorrow. Down in Esther tomorrow. In C with vital passive." "They're going to lose their minds," Alara had said. "Probably." He'd grinned. "It will be spectacular." That night, Alara had fallen asleep in the Alpha King's arms, in his private chambers, listening to his heartbeat and feeling, for the first time in her life, like she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring challenges, opposition, possibly even danger. But they would face it together. The final feast of the Winter Solstice Festival was the most elaborate event of the celebration. The Great Hall had been transformed into a winter wonderland: ice sculptures, silver decorations, and hundreds of candles, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Alara watched from the servants' corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. In a few hours, Davrian would make his announcement. In a few hours, her entire world would change. Quote, "You look like you're about to faint," Senna said, appearing at her elbow with a goblet of water. "Here, drink." "I can't do this," Alara whispered, suddenly overwhelmed. "What was I thinking? I'm nobody. They're going to tear me apart, probably." Senna agreed cheerfully. "But you'll survive. You survived everything else, didn't you?" Before Alara could respond, Thessa, the head healer, appeared in the corridor. "There you are. His Majesty wants you prepared properly. Come with me." Alara followed the healer to a private chamber where several attendants waited with an elaborate gown, deep silver silk that shimmered like moonlight, with delicate embroidery of wolves and stars along the hem and bodice. It was clearly designed to accommodate her pregnancy while making her look regal rather than awkward. "His Majesty had this commissioned weeks ago," Thessa explained as the attendants helped Alara into the dress. "He's been planning this announcement longer than you realize." The gown fit perfectly, flowing over her curves and making her small frame look elegant rather than fragile. They styled her hair in elaborate braids woven with silver thread and added jewelry that must have cost more than her village's entire annual income. When Alara finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged at a royal feast, someone worthy of standing beside a king. "You clean up rather nicely," Thessa said with the ghost of a smile. "Now, His Majesty requests your presence in his private study before the announcement." Davrian was pacing when she entered, dressed in formal black with silver embroidery that matched her gown. He stopped when he saw her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "You're biased," she replied, but she was smiling. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Last chance to back out. We can still keep this private. Wait until after the child is born. Do this more gradually." "No." Alara squeezed his hands. "I told you last night. No more hiding. The council is going to argue that you're unsuitable. They'll point out your background, your pack status, your—" "My weakness?" she finished. "Let them. I'm not going to apologize for who I am anymore. If they can't accept me, that's their failure, not mine." Davrian pulled her close, careful of her swollen belly. "How did I get so lucky?" "You gave a lost Omega a book of poetry," she murmured against his chest. "And then you refused to let her believe she was worthless." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Your Majesty," The feast is beginning. We're coming, Davrian called. He pulled back to look at Alara one more time. Ready? She thought about her old pack, about Kale's rejection, about years of believing she had no value. Then she thought about the child growing inside her, about the man who'd chosen her despite every reason not to, about the future they could build together. I'm ready. The great hall fell silent when they entered together. Alara kept her head high, her hand firmly in Davrian's, as he led her through the crowd of stunned nobles and visiting alphas. She could feel their eyes on her, could sense their confusion and dawning shock as they noticed her pregnancy, her simple origins, her complete unsuitability by traditional standards. Let them stare, Davrian led her to the front of the hall, where his council sat at the high table. Their expressions ranged from confusion to outright horror. My lords, my ladies, Davrian's voice rang out across the hall. I have an announcement to make regarding the succession of the Crystal Court. The crowd leaned forward, eager for gossip. As you know, an Alpha King's first duty is to secure the bloodline. Davrian's hand tightened on Alara's. I am pleased to announce that I have chosen my mate, and she is already carrying the heir to the throne. Gasps rippled through the hall. One of the council members stood abruptly. Your Majesty, surely you haven't. She's from Silverpine Pack, a minor territory, with no political significance. She's also the strongest, bravest, most intelligent woman I've ever met, Davrian replied calmly. And she will be your queen. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to challenge me directly. Silence. No one was stupid enough to challenge the Alpha King in his own court. Furthermore, Davrian continued, I am hereby decreeing that pack status based on origin is no longer a factor in royal consideration. Strength comes in many forms, and we will honor all of them. More gasps. This was radical policy, undermining centuries of pack hierarchy. From the back of the hall, a familiar voice called out, Your Majesty, I must protest. Alara's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Kale pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. That Omega is defective. She cannot bear children. I tried for 3 years. This is clearly a deception, an attempt to pass off another Alpha's bastard as royal blood. Davrian's growl filled the hall, so powerful that several Omegas dropped to their knees in instinctive submission. You dare question my mate's honor in my own court? I dare question how a barren Omega is suddenly pregnant months after being rejected. Kale shot back, either brave or stupid enough to press forward. Unless your Majesty was unaware of her extensive experience during the summit? The implication was clear and vicious, that Alara had slept with multiple alphas, that the child could be anyone's. Alara felt Davrian's fury building, felt him preparing to tear Kale apart. And suddenly, she realized something important. This wasn't Davrian's fight to win. Enough, she said quietly. The hall fell silent. Even Kale looked surprised that she'd spoken. Alara stepped forward, away from Davrian's protective presence, and faced her former mate directly. You're right, she said clearly. I couldn't conceive during our mating. Do you know why? Kale sneered. Because you're defective. No, Alara's voice rang out strong and clear. Because I wasn't being loved. I was being used. My body knew the difference, even if my heart tried to deny it. She turned to address the entire hall. For years I believed I was broken. I believed that my worth was measured by my strength, my ability to shift, my capacity to bear children for a mate who saw me as property rather than a partner. And when I failed to meet those expectations, I believed I deserved to be cast aside. Her hand moved to her stomach. But then I met someone who saw me differently, someone who valued my mind, my spirit, my heart. Someone who made me feel safe enough, cherished enough, for my body to finally believe it was worth creating new life. She met Davrian's eyes across the hall and saw them shining with emotion. "This child is His Majesty's," she continued, her voice unwavering. "Conceived during the lunar summit, carried in love, and born of a bond that transcends pack politics and social hierarchy. If that makes me unsuitable to be queen, then I accept that judgment. But I will not accept being told I'm worthless because I didn't fit someone else's definition of valuable." The hall was absolutely silent. Then, from the back, someone began to clap. Slowly, others joined in. Not everyone. Many of the traditional alphas still looked scandalized, but enough to matter. Davrian crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "That," he murmured against her hair, "was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed." "I'm shaking," she admitted. "You're perfect," he corrected. The feast continued, though the atmosphere had shifted. Some nobles approached to offer tentative congratulations. Others kept their distance, making their disapproval clear. Kyle had been escorted from the hall by guards, still protesting. But as Alara stood beside Davrian, accepting both praise and censure with equal grace, she realized something profound. She wasn't scared anymore. For the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. And no one, not Kyle, not the disapproving nobles, not even her own doubts could take that away from her. The days following the announcement were chaotic. The palace buzzed with gossip and political maneuvering. Half the council demanded that Davrian reconsider, citing tradition and propriety. The other half seemed to be waiting to see which way the wind would blow before committing to a position. Through it all, Alara maintained her dignity, even as she overheard servants calling her the weak queen and the defective Omega who trapped the king. "Let them talk," Davrian had said when she'd mentioned it. "They'll learn." But learning came with a price. 3 weeks after the feast, Alara woke in the middle of the night with agonizing pain in her stomach. She tried to call for help, but the pain was so intense she could barely breathe. Davrian, who'd insisted she stay in his chambers permanently after the announcement, woke immediately. "Alara, what's wrong?" "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong with the baby." He'd carried her to the healing wing himself, shouting for Thessa. The healer had examined her quickly, her expression growing more troubled by the second. "The pup is in distress," Thessa had announced. "Growing too fast, putting strain on her body. We need to slow the development or risk losing both mother and child." "Then do it," Davrian had ordered. "There's a complication, Your Majesty." Thessa had hesitated. "The treatment requires mate bonding. The mother's body needs the alpha's essence, his direct connection through a completed bond. Without it, I can't guarantee success." Alara had seen the conflict flash across Davrian's face. They'd planned to complete the mate bond in a formal ceremony, months from now, after political tensions had settled. "Do it now," she'd whispered. "Complete the bond." "Are you sure?" His hand had gripped hers. "Once it's done, it's permanent. You'll be tied to me forever, for better or worse." "I know," she'd smiled weakly through the pain. "I'm counting on it." The bonding ritual was hastily arranged in the healing wing rather than the formal ceremony hall. Only Thessa and 2 trusted guards were present as witnesses. Davrian had bitten her shoulder, marking her as his mate, while she'd done the same to him. The bond had snapped into place like a physical thing, and suddenly Alara could feel him, his emotions, his presence, his very soul intertwined with hers. The effect on the baby was immediate. The pain eased, and Thessa's examination showed the pup's distress subsiding. It worked, the healer had said with relief. But she needs to rest. Absolutely no stress, no exertion. The next few weeks are critical. But rest proved impossible when 3 days later, a delegation from the Western Territories arrived demanding an audience with the king. Alara, bedridden, but insisting on being present via a viewing crystal that let her see and hear the throne room, watched as the Western Alpha presented his case. The succession is compromised, the Western Alpha declared. We demand proof that the Omega's child is truly yours, Your Majesty, and not the result of prior entanglements. Davrian's voice had been deadly calm. You dare question the mate bond? Question what every wolf in this palace can now sense. Mate bonds can be faked with blood magic, the Western Alpha had pressed. We demand a bloodline verification, conducted by neutral healers, before we acknowledge this pup as legitimate heir. The demand was insulting, designed to humiliate both Davrian and Alara, but refusing would give ammunition to those who wanted to delegitimize their bond. Fine, Davrian had said, and Alara had felt his rage through their new connection. Bring your neutral healers. We'll settle this once and for all. The testing took place the next day. 3 healers, one from each major territory, examined both Alara and Davrian. They used ancient blood magic to trace lineage, verify conception dates, confirm paternity. The results were irrefutable. The child was Davrian's, conceived during the lunar summit, exactly when they'd claimed. But the Western Alpha wasn't finished. Very well, the pup's parentage is confirmed, but that doesn't change the fact that the mother is unsuitable. She's weak, she's from a minor pack, and she's already causing political instability. For the good of the kingdom, we propose that His Majesty take a second, more appropriate mate. Absolutely not, Davrian had cut him off. And allow the Omega to raise the pup in comfortable seclusion. The Western Alpha had continued as if Davrian hadn't spoken. A generous settlement, a private residence, all the support she needs. She wouldn't be cast aside, simply repositioned. Through the viewing crystal, Alara had watched fury transform Davrian's face. But before he could speak, a new voice rang out. I have something to say. Alara had struggled upright in bed, her heart pounding. That voice was familiar but impossible. Through the viewing crystal, she'd watched her father step forward from the crowd of observers. I am Corin of Silverpine Pack, he'd said, his voice shaking but determined. Father to Alara, the king's mate, and I have a confession to make. The throne room had fallen silent. My daughter is not weak, Corin had continued. She was cursed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. When she was an infant, a witch came to our pack seeking shelter. We turned her away. Silverpine was too poor to support outsiders. The witch cursed our firstborn as revenge, binding her wolf, limiting her strength, making her seem defective. His voice had cracked. I thought if I ignored it, if I pretended she was simply born weak, the curse would be less shameful than admitting I'd brought a witch's wrath upon my family. Alara had stopped breathing. You knew? Thessa's voice had been sharp. You knew your daughter was cursed, and you let her suffer for years thinking she was naturally defective? I was a coward, Corin had said, tears streaming down his face. I was ashamed, and I let that shame destroy my daughter's life. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when she's being judged for something that was never her fault. Davrian had risen from his throne, his voice like thunder. Is there a way to break this curse? The witch is dead, Corin had said. But before she died, She told me the curse would break if my daughter ever found someone who loved her for exactly what she was, weaknesses and all. If she was ever truly, completely accepted. Understanding had dawned across multiple faces in the throne room. Cloud. The mate bond. Thessa had breathed. When they completed the mate bond, it should have. She'd stopped, rushing from the throne room. Moments later, she'd burst into Alara's room, her eyes wide. Shift, Thessa had commanded. Try to shift right now. I can't, Alara had said automatically. I've never been able to. Try. Alara had closed her eyes, reaching for her wolf the way she'd done thousands of times before, always meeting that frustrating barrier. But this time, the barrier was gone. Her wolf rose up strong and whole, and Alara felt the shift take her for the first time in her life. Bones restructured, muscles reformed, and when she opened her eyes, she was seeing the world from 4 feet, her senses heightened, her body thrumming with power she'd never known. She was still small, smaller than a normal Omega wolf, but she was strong, healthy, complete. Oh my gods, Thessa had whispered. The curse really is broken. When Alara shifted back, she'd been laughing and crying at the same time. 23 years of believing she was broken, and it had been a curse all along. 23 years of shame that had never been hers to carry. Davrian had appeared in the doorway, having left the throne room the moment Thessa had rushed out. His eyes had widened when he'd seen her. You shifted. I shifted. She'd launched herself at him, and he'd caught her, spinning her around despite her pregnancy. Davrian, I shifted. I have a wolf, a real strong wolf. I know. I felt it through the bond. He'd set her down gently, his hands framing her face. But you need to understand something. This doesn't change how I feel about you. Curse or no curse, weak or strong, I loved you exactly as you were. I know, she'd whispered. That's why it broke. Later, after the Western Alpha had withdrawn his objections, arguing with proof of both legitimate paternity and lifted curses was politically untenable. The Sio Maras. After the throne room had cleared and the palace had settled into shocked gossip, Alara had stood on the balcony of Davrian's chambers, looking out over the moonlit mountains. My father came, she'd said quietly. After everything, he came to help me. Davrian had wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful of her belly. Does that change how you feel about him? I don't know. She'd leaned back against his chest. He let me suffer for years. But in the end, he told the truth, even though it exposed his own cowardice. I think maybe people are more complicated than stories make them seem. Culles. They usually are, Davrian had agreed. Will you see him? He's requested an audience. Alara had thought about it for a long moment. Yes, but not yet. I need time to process this. To understand who I am, now that I'm not the weak Omega anymore. You were never weak, Davrian had reminded her. You survived all of that and still remained kind, still remained yourself. That's the strongest thing anyone can be. She'd turned in his arms, rising up to kiss him. Through their bond, she'd felt his love, his pride, his absolute certainty that she was exactly who he wanted by his side. I love you, she'd whispered, I love you too, he'd replied. My strong, brave, perfect mate. For the first time in her life, Alara had truly believed she was exactly where she belonged. The crisis came 6 weeks before her due date. Alara woke to find Davrian's side of the bed cold, and through their bond, she felt his distress. She wrapped a robe around herself and followed the pull of their connection to his study, where she found him surrounded by maps and urgent dispatches. What's wrong? She asked. He looked up, and the anguish in his eyes made her breath catch. The Northern Territories have declared autonomy. They're claiming my choice of mate proves I'm unfit to rule, that I've put personal desires above pack unity. They're threatening war unless I step down. Alara's hand went to her swollen belly. That's insane. They can't just... They can if enough other territories join them. Davrian's hands clenched into fists, and the Western territories are supporting them. So are parts of the East. They're calling for a leadership challenge. In wolf culture, a leadership challenge was a fight to the death. The current alpha against a challenger, with the winner taking control of the pack. But you're the strongest alpha in generations, Alara protested. No one can defeat you. It's not about strength. Davrian moved to stare out the window at the dawn. It's about politics. If I fight and win, I'll have proven I can defend my position physically, but I'll have killed pack alphas, possibly destabilized entire territories. If I refuse to fight, I look weak, and they'll have grounds to push for my abdication. There has to be another way. There is. He turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her blood run cold. I could end our mate bond. Publicly reject you and the pup. Claim I was under the influence of blood magic or temporary insanity. Choose a politically advantageous mate instead. You wouldn't, she whispered. Of course I wouldn't. He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. But that's what they're counting on. They know I won't abandon you, so they're using that against me. Either I keep my mate and lose the crown, or I keep the crown and lose you. Through their bond, Alara felt the depth of his conflict, the way it was tearing him apart. What are you going to do? I don't know, his voice cracked. I've been king my entire adult life. I've dedicated everything to the unity of the packs, to building something stronger than the fractured territories my father left me. But I can't. He pulled back to look at her. I can't lose you. I won't. Even if it means losing the crown? His answer was immediate. Even then, over the next week, the political situation deteriorated rapidly. More territories declared support for the Northern Coalition. Davrian's own council fractured, with half urging him to reconsider his mate choice, and the other half arguing for military action against the rebels. Through it all, Alara felt increasingly helpless. She was the cause of this crisis, the reason Davrian was being forced to choose between his duty and his heart. It's not your fault, Davrian insisted each time she tried to apologize. This was always coming. The old guard has been looking for an excuse to challenge my reforms, my attempts to move past the rigid hierarchies of the past. You're not the cause, you're just the catalyst they chose to use. 1. Power. But knowing that didn't make Alara feel better. The breaking point came when an assassination attempt was made on Davrian's life. He survived, barely, taking a poisoned blade meant for his heart in his shoulder instead. The assassin was captured a wolf from the Northern Territories, who confessed under questioning that he'd been sent to eliminate the king before the formal challenge could take place. As Alara sat beside Davrian's bed in the healing wing, watching Thessa work frantically to counteract the poison, she felt something inside her harden. She'd been passive for too long, accepting her fate, letting others make decisions about her worth, allowing the political situation to control her life. But she wasn't that weak Omega anymore. She was the Alpha King's mate, the mother of the royal heir, and she had her own strength now. When Davrian finally woke, 3 days after the attack, Alara was waiting. I have a plan, she said before he could speak. He'd listened as she'd explained, his expression shifting from concern to reluctant admiration. It's dangerous, he'd said when she'd finished. Everything about our relationship has been dangerous, she'd countered. But we've survived all of it. Power. We'll survive this too. Are you sure? Alara had placed his hand over her belly, where their pup kicked vigorously. "I'm sure. Trust me." He'd studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Always." 2 weeks later, Alara stood before the assembled representatives of every major pack in the kingdom. Davrian sat on his throne, still recovering from the assassination attempt, his face carefully neutral as she addressed the crowd. "I've been called many things," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Weak, defective, unsuitable, a political liability. And for most of my life, I believed those labels were true." The hall was silent, every eye on her, power mana cast. "But I've learned something important. Strength isn't just physical power. It's not just the ability to dominate others or win fights. Strength is surviving what should have broken you. Strength is maintaining your kindness when the world teaches you to be cruel. Strength is standing here, heavily pregnant and politically inconvenient, and refusing to apologize for existing." Some of the alphas shifted uncomfortably. "You want King Davrian to reject me to prove his dedication to pack unity," she continued. "But what kind of unity is built on the foundation of rejecting those who don't fit narrow definitions of acceptable? What kind of strength is demonstrated by abandoning the people we love because it's politically convenient?" She moved forward, addressing the Northern Alpha directly. "You claim my mate is unfit to rule because he chose love over politics." She moved forward, addressing the Northern Alpha directly. "You claim my mate is unfit to rule because he chose love over politics. But I would argue the opposite. A king who will sacrifice everything for one Omega is a king who will fight just as fiercely for every member of his kingdom. That's the kind of leader I would follow." "Pretty words," the Northern Alpha said coldly. "But they don't change the facts. You're weak, inexperienced, and a political disaster. The king needs a strong mate, not a liability." "Then challenge me," Alara said simply. Gasps rippled through the hall. "What?" The Northern Alpha looked confused. "You claim I'm weak. Prove it." Alara's wolf rose in her eyes, strong and fierce. "I invoke the right of personal challenge. You against me, here and now. If I lose, I'll voluntarily sever the mate bond and leave the court. If I win, you withdraw your opposition and acknowledge my right to stand as the king's mate." "You're pregnant," someone protested. "You can't possibly." "I can and I will," Alara interrupted. "Unless the Northern Alpha is afraid to fight a pregnant Omega?" The trap was perfect. If he refused, he looked like a coward. If he accepted and hurt her or the pup, he'd be the monster who attacked a pregnant female. If he accepted and lost to someone he'd publicly called weak, he'd be humiliated beyond recovery. The Northern Alpha's face flushed with rage. "I accept," he growled. Davrian had shot to his feet. "Alara, no. Trust me," she'd said through their bond. "Please, just trust me, Paris." The challenge would take place at sunset, the traditional trial by combat, shifted into wolf form, witnessed by representatives from every pack. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Alara stood in the preparation chamber, trying to calm her racing heart. "This is insane," Thessa muttered as she checked Alara's vitals one last time. "You're 8 months pregnant. If he hurts the pup, he won't get the chance," Alara said with more confidence than she felt. When they led her into the challenge arena, she saw Davrian standing at the edge, his face tight with barely controlled terror. Through their bond, she felt his fear for her, his pride in her courage, his desperate hope that her plan would work. The Northern Alpha entered from the opposite side, already shifted a massive gray wolf easily 4 times Alara's size. "Last chance to withdraw," the challenge officiator called out. "No," Elara said clearly. Then she shifted. Her wolf was small, silvery white, nothing compared to the gray giant facing her. But she was fast, and she was smart, and most importantly, she wasn't trying to win. She just needed to survive. The northern alpha lunged, and Elara darted aside. He was powerful but slow, his movements predictable. She led him around the arena, always staying just out of reach, making him look clumsy and frustrated. "Stand and fight," he snarled. "Why?" Elara's wolf voice rang out clear. "You're the one who needs to prove something. I'm already exactly what I claim to be." She continued to dodge, and the crowd began to murmur. Because they could all see it now, the northern alpha, huge and powerful, repeatedly unable to catch a pregnant omega. It was humiliating. Xiomara's. Finally, he made a mistake. Charging forward, with too much momentum, he couldn't stop when Elara dodged aside. He crashed into the arena wall, momentarily dazed. Elara could have pressed her advantage, could have attacked while he was vulnerable. Instead, she shifted back to human form and walked away. "I withdraw," she called out. "Not because I couldn't win, but because I don't need to. I've already proven my point." She turned to face the assembled packs. "I am not weak. I am strategic. I am not a liability. I am an asset. And any pack that can't see the value in different forms of strength is the one that's truly weak." Then she'd walked calmly out of the arena, leaving the northern alpha still recovering from his impact with the wall and the crowd buzzing with shocked conversation. That night, in their private chambers, Davrian had held her close. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen." "Both," Elara admitted. "But it worked." The Northern Territories withdrew their challenge within an hour. He murmured against her hair, and 3 other territories that had been supporting them switched sides. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected, "together." But she knew the real trial was still to come, because in 2 weeks, she would give birth to the royal heir. And then they would discover if the pack truly accepted her, or if this had all been a temporary victory in a much longer war. The contractions started 2 weeks early, in the middle of a diplomatic dinner with representatives from the Eastern Territories. Elara had been discussing trade agreements with an Eastern beta when pain lanced through her abdomen so intense, she gasped mid-sentence. "Your Majesty?" The beta looked concerned. "Are you well?" "Aye." Another contraction, stronger this time. "I think the pup is coming." Chaos erupted. Devrian was at her side instantly, sweeping her into his arms, despite protocol demanding he maintain regal composure during state functions. Healers were summoned, the dinner forgotten, and within minutes, Elara found herself in the royal birthing suite, with Thessa barking orders at 6 assistant healers. "How far apart are the contractions?" Thessa demanded. 3 minutes. Elara gasped. "Maybe less." "That's too fast." Thessa's expression turned grim. "This pup is coming quickly, too quickly." Davrian hadn't left her side, holding her hand as another contraction tore through her. Through their bond, she could feel his terror warring with his need to appear calm for her sake. "What's wrong?" he demanded. "Why is it too fast?" Royal bloodlines often have accelerated labor, but this is extreme. Thessa examined Elara quickly. "The pup is strong, stronger than anticipated. It's forcing the birth at a dangerous pace. Can you slow it down?" Elara asked through gritted teeth. "Not without risking both of you." Thessa made her decision. "We proceed naturally, but we need to be prepared for complications." The next hours blurred into agony. Each contraction felt like being torn apart from the inside. The pup's strength, which had seemed like such a blessing during her pregnancy, now became a threat as it pushed to enter the world with supernatural force. Something's wrong? One of the assistant healers said urgently. The pup's energy is too volatile. It's not just strong, it's unstable. Power? What does that mean? Davrian's voice was sharp with fear. It means, Thessa said grimly, that your heir might be something we've never seen before. A hybrid of power that's trying to break free before the body is ready to contain it. Another contraction. This one so powerful that Alara screamed. Through the pain, she felt something else, a presence, foreign and yet intimately familiar. The pup's consciousness, strong and aware, in a way that should be impossible for an unborn child. "Mother!" a voice whispered in her mind. "I'm scared." Alara's eyes flew open. "The baby is talking to me." "That's impossible," one of the healers breathed. "Pups don't develop mental communication until it—" "Now," Thessa commanded. "She needs to push now." What followed was the most excruciating experience of Alara's life. The pup fought to be born, while simultaneously seeming terrified of leaving the safety of the womb. Its power surged and retreated, making the labor unpredictable and dangerous. "I can't," Alara sobbed after another failed push. "It's too strong. I can't." "Yes, you can," Davrian said fiercely, his forehead pressed to hers. "You survived a curse, rejection, political warfare, and a challenge while pregnant. You can survive this." Through their bond, he poured his strength into her, and Alara drew on it desperately. "Little one," she thought toward the pup, "I know you're scared, but you need to trust me. I'll keep you safe, I promise." The presence in her mind hesitated, then seemed to relax slightly. "One more push," Thessa urged. "Give me everything you have." Alara bore down with every ounce of strength she possessed, drawing on Davrian's power through their bond, on her own newfound wolf strength, on the sheer determination to meet this child she'd carried through so much. The pup emerged in a rush of fluid and energy that sent several of the healers stumbling backward. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a cry strong and healthy and indignant at being thrust into the cold air. "A girl," Thessa announced, her voice filled with awe. "You have a daughter." They placed the baby in Alara's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face already so fierce, with silvery eyes that seemed far too aware for a newborn. "Hello, little one," Alara whispered. "I'm your mother." The baby's eyes focused on her, and Alara felt that mental presence again, stronger now. Not words exactly, but emotions, recognition, trust, love. Davrian leaned over them both, his finger gently stroking their daughter's cheek. "She's perfect." "She's powerful," Thessa corrected, studying the infant with professional interest. "More powerful than any royal pup I've ever examined. Your Majesty, this child will need careful training as she grows." "That kind of strength, if not properly channeled," discord, "will be an asset to the kingdom," Davrian finished firmly. "Just like her mother." But as Alara held her daughter, feeling the immense power radiating from such a tiny body, she understood Thessa's concern. This pup was something new, something unprecedented. The question was whether the kingdom would see that as a blessing or a threat. The answer came 3 days later. Alara was still recovering in the royal chambers when Davrian burst in, his face ashen. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The council just held an emergency session. Several members are claiming our daughter is too dangerous to be recognized as heir. They're calling her an abomination, a hybrid that threatens the natural order." Alara's arms tightened around the sleeping infant. "On what grounds?" "Her power level, the mental communication, the way she nearly killed you during birth. Davrian's voice was tight with rage. They're demanding she be placed under observation, essentially imprisoned until they can determine if she's safe. Over my dead body, Alara said flatly. That may be what they're counting on. Davrian sat beside her on the bed. If we refuse, they'll claim we're putting personal interests above pack safety. If we comply, we lose our daughter to their observation, which could mean anything. Through their bond, Alara felt his desperation, his fury at being trapped yet again by politics. There's more, he added quietly. Someone leaked the information about her mental communication abilities to the other territories. By now, every major pack knows we've produced a pup with unprecedented power. Some are calling for her elimination, claiming she could grow into a threat that no alpha could control. Alara looked down at her daughter's peaceful face. She's 3 days old. She's not a threat, she's a baby. I know. But fear makes people irrational. Davrian's hand covered hers where it rested on their daughter's back. We need to leave. Tonight. Get you both somewhere safe while I deal with the council. No. Alara's voice was firm. We don't run. We don't hide. We face this together. As a family. Alara. Listen to me. She turned to face him fully. Our daughter is powerful, yes. But you know what's more dangerous than her power? The precedent we'd set by running. By implying that strength should be hidden or apologized for. By teaching her that who she is naturally is something to be ashamed of. But she is naturally, inclused herd other herd, but never bast time, or sell force, to face so. Davrian stared at her. What are you suggesting? We call a gathering. Every major pack, every council member, every alpha who's claimed our daughter is a threat. We bring them here and we show them exactly what we've created. That's insanely risky. So was challenging the Northern Alpha while pregnant. Alara reminded him with a slight smile. But it worked. Sometimes the only way through fear is to face it directly. He studied her face for a long moment, then slowly smiled. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm terrified, she admitted. But I'm more terrified of letting fear control our lives again. We didn't survive everything we've been through just to hide our daughter away like she's something shameful. Then we fight, Davrian said. One last time, Concio Maras. Together, Alara agreed, leaning in to kiss him. Always together. Their daughter stirred in her sleep, letting out a small sound. And in that moment, feeling her child's warmth, her mate's love, and her own hard-won strength, Alara knew they would survive this too. They had to. Because their daughter deserved to grow up in a world where being different, being powerful, being more than what others expected, wasn't a crime. It was a gift. The Great Hall had never held so many alphas at once. Representatives from every major territory crowded the space, their combined dominance making the air thick and oppressive. At the edges stood betas and advisors, all watching with hawk-like intensity. Alara stood at the center of it all, her daughter cradled in her arms, with Davrian at her side. She wore simple robes rather than formal regalia, a deliberate choice. This wasn't about royal pageantry, this was about truth. You've summoned us here to display the pup? The Eastern Alpha said, his voice carefully neutral. Show us then. Show us this child who's caused such concern. First, Alara said clearly, I want everyone to understand what you're actually demanding. You're not asking to see our daughter. You're asking to judge whether an infant deserves to live based on power she didn't choose and can't control. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. That's not, one council member began. That's exactly what this is, Davrian interrupted, his voice hard. Let's not pretend otherwise. You fear what she might become, so you want to eliminate or imprison her before she has a chance to prove you wrong. They have not for you fake chassis. It is no the vast sided for the sided content in a. And if you actually she's he would find stayed and is sided for the sided contented way. With respect, Your Majesty, the Western Alpha said, unprecedented power requires unprecedented caution. We're not advocating for harm, merely observation and containment until we understand what we're dealing with. Containment, Alara repeated. That's a gentle word for imprisonment. For taking a child from her parents and raising her in isolation, teaching her that her existence is inherently threatening. She looked around the room, meeting eyes that ranged from sympathetic to hostile. I was taught something similar, that my weakness made me worthless, that my differences made me dangerous to the pack's perception of strength. I spent years believing I was broken because I didn't fit your definitions of acceptable. This is hardly comparable, someone protested. It's exactly comparable. Alara cut them off. You fear her because she's different. Because her strength doesn't fit into comfortable categories. Because she challenges your understanding of what's possible. She gently shifted her daughter in her arms, so the assembled alphas could see her clearly. The baby's silvery eyes were open, tracking the crowd with unnerving awareness. Look at her, Alara commanded. Really look. What do you see? Power, the Northern Alpha said quietly. Raw, untrained power that could devastate if misused. Quote, I see a threat to the established order, another Alpha added. I see potential. A new voice called out. One of the younger Alphas, from a minor territory in the south. Potential for either great good or great harm, depending on how she's raised. Exactly, Davrian said. And you want to ensure she's raised to fear herself, to see her gifts as curses. That's how you create the monster you're afraid of. A council member stood. Your Majesty, we understand your protective instincts, but... The baby sneezed. It shouldn't have been significant. Infants sneeze. But when this infant sneezed, a pulse of energy radiated outward that every wolf in the room felt. Several alphas stumbled. The crystal chandeliers above them rattled. The room erupted in shouts of alarm. You see, someone yelled, uncontrolled, dangerous. She's 4 days old and she sneezed. Alara shouted back. She has no control because she's an infant. That's not evidence of malice, it's evidence that she's a baby. But the damage was done. Fear had taken root, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. This is exactly what we feared, the Eastern Alpha said, his voice grim. That level of power, completely uncontrolled, in the body of someone too young to understand consequences. She needs to be... No. The word rang out with finality. Everyone turned to look at Davrian. He stood at his full height, every inch the Alpha King. His power radiating outward in waves that made even the strongest alphas in the room take a step back, calm. You want to take my daughter because you fear her power, he said, his voice deadly calm. But here's what you're forgetting. She's my heir. She carries my bloodline, and with it, every ounce of my strength. If you truly believe she's too powerful to exist freely, then you must believe the same of me. Your Majesty, that's not. So here's what's going to happen. Davrian continued as if no one had spoken. You can accept my daughter as my legitimate heir, with all the rights and protections that entails. Or you can challenge me directly for the crown, and we'll settle this the old way through combat. Whoever wins will decide what happens to my family. Shocked silence filled the hall. You can't be serious, the Western Alpha breathed. You would risk your crown, your life, over this. Without hesitation, Davrian said. My daughter is not a threat to be contained. She's the future of this kingdom. And if you can't see that, then perhaps I'm not the right king for you. Through their bond, Alara felt his resolve, absolute and unwavering. He meant every word. He would fight them all if necessary, would burn down everything he'd built, rather than let them take their child. And suddenly, she understood something profound. The curse on her hadn't just been broken by love. It had been broken by the kind of love that sees past external definitions of worth, that values the person over their utility, power, that refuses to compromise on what truly matters. Davrian had learned that lesson months before, when he'd nearly died, rather than reveal her existence. But this was different. This was him choosing their daughter, choosing love over the crown itself. Not in words, but in action. Not as a sacrifice, but as a declaration of values. Wait, Alara said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped forward, still holding their daughter, and addressed the assembled alphas directly. You want proof that our daughter won't become the monster you fear? I'll give you proof. Alara, what are you doing? Davrian asked through their bond. Trust me. She replied the same way. She looked down at their daughter, at those impossibly aware silver eyes. Little one, she said softly, can you hear me? The baby's gaze focused on her mother's face. I know you're scared. All these strangers, all this fear directed at you. But I need you to trust me, the way I trusted you during the birth. She felt the mental presence stir, questioning. These people think you're dangerous because you're powerful. They think power without control is a threat, so show them they're wrong. Alara held her daughter up, presenting her to the room. Everyone here, release your dominance, all of it. Fill this room with your combined alpha power. That's madness, someone protested. That much concentrated dominance could— Do it, Davrian commanded, understanding what Alara was attempting. Slowly, reluctantly, the alphas complied. The air grew thick with power, oppressive and overwhelming. Every beta in the room dropped to their knees. Even Alara, with her mate bond strengthening her, felt the pressure like a physical weight. But their daughter simply watched with calm silver eyes. She should be crying? Thessa whispered from the sidelines. That level of dominance, directed at an infant, she should be screaming in terror. But she's not, Alara said. Because she's stronger than all of you. And more than that, she's choosing not to retaliate. She could push back, could overwhelm you all with her own power, but she won't, because even at 4 days old, she understands restraint. God, she turned to face the room. You asked what kind of heir we've created? Here's your answer. Someone powerful enough to defend herself, but controlled enough to choose peace. Someone who will be strong enough to lead, but compassionate enough to lead well. The baby gurgled, reaching up to grab Alara's finger, and the simple, innocent gesture broke something in the room's tension. She's just a baby, the young Southern Alpha said, his voice filled with wonder. A powerful baby, yes, but still just a baby. Others began to nod, the fear slowly draining from the room, as they truly looked not at a threat, but at an infant held lovingly by her parents. The real question, Alara continued, isn't whether our daughter is too powerful to exist freely. It's whether you're brave enough to let her, person in. Brave enough to trust that strength guided by love and wisdom will serve this kingdom better than strength suppressed by fear. She walked forward, stopping in front of the Eastern Alpha, the one who'd been most vocal in his opposition. Would you like to hold her? His eyes widened in shock. What? Hold her. See for yourself that she's not a monster. She's a child who needs guidance, not a prisoner who needs guards. Slowly, carefully, The Eastern Alpha extended his arms. Alara placed their daughter in them and watched as the powerful Alpha's expression transformed from fear to wonder to something almost paternal. "She's smiling at me," he said, sounding amazed. "Because she senses you're not truly hostile," Alara explained. "Her power reads intention, not just strength. She knows the difference between protection and imprisonment." Alara. The Eastern Alpha held her for a moment longer, then carefully returned her to Alara's arms. I withdraw my objection," he said quietly. "You're right. She's powerful, but she's not a threat. Not yet, and not if raised correctly." One by one, other alphas stepped forward not to challenge, but to acknowledge, to accept. When it was done, when every major pack had confirmed their support for the royal heir, Davrian pulled Alara close. "How did you know?" he murmured. "How did you know she'd stay calm?" "Because she's ours," Alara replied simply. "She has your strength and my survival instincts. She knows when to fight and when to endure. And most importantly, she trusts us to protect her, so she doesn't need to protect herself." That night, alone in their chambers with their daughters sleeping peacefully between them, Davrian traced Alara's face with gentle fingers. "I was ready to give it all up," he admitted. "The crown, the kingdom, everything. For you and her." "I know," Alara whispered. "And that's exactly why you deserve to keep it. Because you understand that some things matter more than power." "When did you become so wise?" "When I realized that weakness and strength aren't opposites, they're just different forms of the same thing. Survival." She smiled. "I survived by being underestimated. Our daughter will survive by being understood. And you survive by loving fiercely enough to let go if necessary." "I love you," he said. "Both of you, more than I have words for." "We know," Alara replied, feeling their daughter's contentment through that strange mental link, feeling Davrian's devotion through their mate bond. "We know." And for the first time since this whole journey began, Alara felt completely, genuinely at peace. 6 months later, spring arrived at the Crystal Court with an explosion of wildflowers and new growth. Alara stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching her daughter they'd named her Lyric for the poetry that had first brought her parents together, practice shifting for the first time. At 6 months old, Lyric was developing faster than any pup in recorded history. She'd spoken her first words at 3 months, taken her first steps at 4, and now she was attempting what most wolf pups didn't achieve until their 2nd year. "Come on, little one," Alara encouraged. "You can do it." Lyric's face scrunched with concentration. Her small body shimmered, wavered, and then a tiny silver wolf pup sat where the baby had been, looking immensely pleased with herself. "Davrian," Alara called. "She did it." The king appeared from his study, crossing the balcony in 3 strides. "Already? She's only—" He stopped, staring at their daughter in her wolf form. "She's beautiful," Lyric yipped proudly, then tumbled over her own paws, shifting back to human in her surprise. She sat on the floor, looking indignant, and both her parents burst out laughing. "Praso." "Don't worry, darling," Alara said, scooping her up. "Even your mother took 23 years to shift for the first time. You're doing wonderfully." A knock at the door interrupted them. Thessa entered, followed by an unexpected visitor, Corin, Alara's father. It was the first time he'd visited since the revelation about the curse. Alara had seen him briefly at Lyric's blessing ceremony, but they hadn't spoken privately. "Corin, Your Majesty." Corin bowed deeply to Davrian, then turned to Alara. "Daughter, I was hoping we might talk." Alara glanced at Davrian, who nodded and took Lyric. Come on, little wolf. Let's go practice shifting where there's soft grass to land on. After they left, Alara gestured to a chair. Sit, father. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, Corin spoke. She's extraordinary. Your daughter. Nothing like what I expected. She's exactly what I hoped for, Alara corrected gently. Strong and unique, just like her parents. Corin flinched. I'm not here to make excuses. What I did, letting you suffer under that curse, letting you believe you were defective, there's no apology adequate for that kind of betrayal. Xiomara's, quote, No, Alara agreed, there isn't. But I'm here anyway, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Because you're my daughter, and I failed you, and I need you to know that I see that now. I see what my cowardice cost you. Alara studied him, this man who'd shaped so much of her pain, who'd stood silent while her pack degraded her, who'd only found his courage when it was almost too late. I used to dream about this conversation, she said quietly. About you apologizing, acknowledging what you'd done. I thought it would make everything better, that your regret would somehow heal the wounds. And now? Corin asked, his eyes wet. Now I realize that healing doesn't come from other people's recognition. It comes from our own acceptance of ourselves. Alara leaned forward. I don't need your apology to be whole, father. I'm already whole. I've been whole all along. I just couldn't see it until I found people who reflected my worth back to me. Then why am I here? He asked. If you don't need my apology, why let me visit? Because Lyric should know her grandfather, Alara said simply. Not the version who betrayed me, but the one who finally found the courage to speak truth. Children need to see that people can change, can grow, can become better than they were. Corin stared at her. You would let me be part of her life? After everything? Powers. On one condition, Alara said firmly. You never make her feel like her power is something to be ashamed of. You never suggest she should be anything other than exactly who she is. If you can do that, if you can be the grandfather to her that you weren't able to be a father to me, then yes, I want you in her life. I can do that, Corin said, his voice breaking. I swear to you I can do that. They talked for another hour, carefully rebuilding something that might never be trust, but could perhaps become understanding. When Corin finally left, Alara felt lighter not because she'd forgiven him in some grand, sweeping gesture, but because she'd made peace with the fact that his redemption wasn't her responsibility. She could offer grace without demanding her own healing depend on his growth. Later that evening, the royal family hosted their first informal gathering, not a state function or political necessity, but simply a dinner with those who'd become their true friends. Tessa was there, trading medical stories with a visiting healer. The young Southern Alpha had become a close advisor, currently engaged in an animated debate with Davrian about trade routes. Even Senna, Alara's former roommate from the servants' quarters, attended, now serving as Lyric's primary caretaker, and clearly adoring the role. Look at you, Senna said, watching Alara move through the room with practiced grace. From rejected Omega to beloved Queen. Who would have thought? Nomina said, I would have. Alara replied with a smile. Eventually, it just took me a while to see it. As the evening wore on, Alara found herself on the balcony again, watching the stars emerge. Davrian joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. Happy? He asked. Surprisingly, yes, she said. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for someone to reveal this is all temporary. But it's not, is it? This is real. It's real, he confirmed. The most real thing I've ever had. Lyric's cry drifted from the nursery, not distressed, just demanding attention. They both smiled. I should, Alara began. I'll go, Davrian said. You've been on your feet all evening. She watched him disappear inside, then turned back to the stars. Somewhere out there, in a village she'd never returned to, her old pack lived their lives. Kale had taken a new mate, she'd heard. The pack had a new Omega cast aside for being different. Some things never changed. But some things did. Alara thought about the little girl inside, who would grow up knowing her power was a gift, not a curse. Who would learn that being different meant being remarkable, not defective. Who would understand from birth that her worth wasn't contingent on fitting someone else's definition of acceptable. I made it, Alara whispered to the night sky. I survived everything, and I made it to the other side. A cool breeze carried the scent of jasmine and cedar. Davrian's scent, now permanently mixed with her own through their bond. From inside came the sound of his laugh as Lyric presumably did something adorable and dangerous. This was her life now. Not perfect, but real. Not without challenges, but faced together. Not the fairy tale she'd once dreamed of, but something better. Something earned through pain and growth, and stubborn refusal to be less than she was. Davrian appeared in the doorway, Lyric in his arms. She wants her mother. Alara took their daughter, feeling the immediate contentment through their mental link. Lyric's tiny hand grabbed her mother's finger, holding tight. You know what the answer was? Alara said softly. To the riddle I never answered back in those first months? What riddle? Davrian asked, pulling them both close. The one I used to deflect your proposals. I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak me, and kept by those who never sought me. What was the answer? Alara looked at her daughter, then at her mate, then at the life they'd built together through sheer determined love. Hope, she said simply. The answer was always hope. Held by those who can't touch it directly, broken by those who voice their despair, kept by those who never sought it. It commands fate without being commanded itself. Davrian pressed a kiss to her temple. That's beautiful. It's true, Alara corrected. Hope is what survived when everything else was stripped away. Hope is what brought us here. And hope, she looked down at Lyric, is what she represents. A future where being different isn't a curse, where being powerful isn't a threat, where love actually can conquer fear. Quote, to hope. Then, Davrian said softly, caught to hope. Alara agreed. And to never underestimating the weak Omega, who refused to stay broken. Inside the palace, music began to play. Someone had started dancing in the great hall, and laughter drifted through the open windows. Their friends were celebrating, their kingdom was thriving, and their daughter was falling asleep against Alara's shoulder, perfectly safe and perfectly loved. It wasn't the ending Alara had imagined in her years of lonely storytelling. It was better. Because it was real, it was earned, and it was theirs. And as the stars wheeled overhead and spring breathed new life into the world, the weak Omega who'd been cast aside stood in the palace of the Alpha King, holding their miracle child, and finally believed she deserved every bit of happiness she'd found. This is the complete final draft with all character and event inconsistencies corrected. The story maintains continuity throughout all 12 parts, with consistent character names: Alara, Davrian, Kale, Corin, Thessa, Senna, Lyric, coherent plot progression, and unified thematic elements.